Well, let me offer a few brief words, but I'll try to keep it concise so that we can take up whatever topics are most important in your view for us to discuss. First of all, I want to thank you, Myra, for your work with the party as well as for bringing us together. And I think it's a really fitting moment for us to have this conversation as we see our communities and our country growing and finding a future largely because of the contributions of the Latino community. And yet are still working, I think, to lift up the political power and voice of those who have such a stake in the decisions that are being made. Part of the way, before I tell you what we envision doing nationally, I want to make sure you understand how my views have been formed. I'm from a community that, like Beaufort, is about 15% Latino now, and growing quickly. It's the fastest growing part of our city. And it's the reason that our city is today growing and not shrinking. And that's true of many neighborhoods and many communities around the country. And what we see is an entrepreneurial spirit, a work ethic, a commitment to faith and to family that is very much part of the fabric of our hometown. I've also seen the consequences of the sense of fear that has been created by the current administration. I remember when the southwest side of our city effectively shut down simply because of the rumor of an ICE raid soon after this president took office. It was only a rumor, but the effect that had, people gathering in church, people wondering if they were safe, if their families were going to be divided, did nothing to make our community or our country safer. And on the contrary, created a great deal of harm in terms of our ability to move forward as a community. I also see a lot of potential for us to take action on the issues that I hear the most about from Latino residents and Americans across the U.S. Not only immigration, although immigration is clearly something that is overdue for reform. We've been talking about this issue without major reform since the mid-1980s. And the striking thing to me is that there is a majority right now in the U.S. to do the right thing, if we can hold that majority together and mobilize it to deliver action. And when I say do the right thing, I mean ensuring that there is a pathway to citizenship for the undocumented in the United States, especially making sure that we normalize the status of dreamers and create a pathway to citizenship there. And recognize that when we do this, this is also an investment in the future of this country. I was alarmed to discover that South Carolina still does not provide in-state tuition, for example, to in-state residents based on status. This is a self-defeating and punitive policy. And it's an example of how our country is weakened by its refusal to invest in our own future. It means ensuring that we improve the lawful immigration process, which is how my own father came to this country in the 1970s, but now includes arbitrary country caps that are not related to anything that can be defended in terms of reason, as well as dealing with the backlogs that exist in the system. So while a lot of attention, rightly, is focused on the cruelty and inhumanity of this administration's enforcement practices on the border, I believe we need to not only act in terms of what's happening on the border, for example, to put an end to family separation, to put an end to the use of for-profit detention facilities for children, and to ensure that asylum is recognized as a legitimate right. But also that we have to fix the fundamental system beneath all of this so that the laws that are being enforced are laws that make sense. Otherwise, we're going to continue to have problems on the enforcement side, too. And then there is the big picture of U.S. policy, and that what we are doing in our own hemisphere and in our own neighborhood to support the peoples of the Americas and to support prosperity. It is one thing for people to be arriving at our country seeking economic opportunity. There are a lot of people who are arriving at the borders of our country fleeing for their lives. And we see this in terms of the increased migration from the Central American Triangle countries, for example, where everybody has an interest in supporting stability and prosperity there. And yes, that means committing United States support and aid. We need to get a message to the people of Venezuela that we support their democratic aspirations as they rise up against dictatorship. but also to those who are here. We need to extend temporary protected status and connect it to a pathway to citizenship, because America has always been at its best when we have stood with those who have universal aspirations. We need to recognize the economic potential of the Latino community. Small businesses that are revitalizing communities like mine in the industrial Midwest, and a need for corporate America to be more inclusive. Some of the fastest growing markets in the world are better connected to us if and only if we do a better job of empowering those who have often been excluded. And it's one of the reasons why we're prioritizing resources for minority-serving institutions, for example, that can create educational support for those who have been excluded. So these are some of the things on my mind and how we get there. In addition to, I think, an underlying moral issue for the United States, because I see, unfortunately, a lot of what is being done in Washington today cloaked in religious language. When the religion that I hear about when I go to church on Sunday talks about the obligation to welcome the stranger and to identify with those who are oppressed. And I think that has implications too. And while I would never impose my religious beliefs on anybody else, I do think that we need to have a different conversation about the moral weight of the decisions that the United States is about to make. The core vision of my campaign is to establish a sense of belonging in the United States where there has been a sense of exclusion. And there are different ways that different people have been told that they don't belong, but that message is reaching so many people. And I believe it is harming our health as a country. And so all of the policies and even just the tone and the approach that I seek to bring through this campaign and to the White House is about building up a sense of belonging that allows everybody to know that they can thrive in the future we're trying to build. This is not only about defeating the current president, although I consider it extremely important that we defeat the current president. Anybody running for president now, by definition, is competing to be the first president after Donald Trump leaves office. And the question on my mind is, what will America need in that moment? And that's a moment when we will need to be brought together, when we will need to act to solve these problems, and when we will need to establish that sense of belonging. So let me pause there. Hopefully that gives you an overview of some of the issues that are on my mind. Podemos tratar de platicar en español con un poco de ayuda, pero no es perfecto para mí, entonces con su paciencia podemos hablar en español también. Pero les agradezco de nuevo por esta oportunidad de hablar.
Gracias. Muy buen español. So, this is the time. Let's speak.
I'll just start off. I wanted to make sure you knew in South Carolina under DACA, because DACA is a big issue that can be solved. We've tried to work with past Congressman Sanford on this, and especially from an economic hawk situation that he is on the economics of it, because it's so powerful. South Carolina is also, I think, one of only 2 states where we do not offer licensure. I knew you knew about the in-state tuition, out-of-state tuition, but with all the media here, I want to make sure we get out that we're graduating nurses with DACA, and they cannot get a nursing license in the state of South Carolina, when the most prized possession for any medical institution, and I served 5 years on Hilton Head Hospital's tenant health board, is a bilingual healthcare provider. And so again, I think we're in the phrase, and I like what you say, is I believe in if we embraced our diversity here in South Carolina, we would be a lot more powerful economically. And I think that's an important piece to start out with. I don't know if you knew that or not.
I hadn't connected it to the nursing piece, so it's a great point.
Even if you're a barber,
you
can't even be a barber in South Carolina. So we're forcing our kids to leave the state of South Carolina, and Florida's happy to take them.
Right.
And we have more people that are retirees moving here, and nationally these are the statistics, right? We have more people leaving the workforce than we're birthing in. So, in the bigger economics, I think there's...
It's a great point, and it's so self-defeating, again, to deny ourselves the opportunity to capture the talents. And some of those talented people in our city are DACA recipients who are doing things to organize the community, to grow business, and to serve in areas where we need more folks.
They're the cream of the crop. They not only speak the language, they know the culture. And
Right.
they know the culture of their parents versus their peers.
Right.
And they're the people in the businesses, pulling those businesses forward. I have one, my brother's an attorney, has one.
Yeah.
They are the best of the best.
Well, and one thing we know is that that kind of cultural competence, staying with the healthcare field for a moment, is vitally important to dealing with different health outcomes. And I'd love to get more of the FQHC perspective on how that plays out here on the ground. But we know that one of the reasons that we have different levels of mortality from certain diseases, disproportionate Latino impact of HIV/AIDS, maternal mortality gap. A lot of this is mitigated if we do something to empower professionals in the field. And by the way, not just professional licensure, but things like driver's licenses, right? That's a problem in our state. So what we did about it was, as a city, we just created our own ID system. Now, you can't drive with it, you can't fly with it, you can't vote with it. But we realized that it still mattered for people who were unable to just get through some basic transactions in life, couldn't pick up a transcript from community college, or pick up your kid from daycare sometimes, or identify yourself in an interaction with law enforcement.
And I applaud you for that. And that's been our message to our municipalities and counties around here is, if the state is, what we hear is the excuse of, oh, well, the state, or
Right.
it's the government. Well, let's embrace and do what your city did and come up with some things that empower people.
Yeah, and that
Instead
part,
of isolating.
working side by side was vital, and it was challenging. For example, one of the things we realized was when we created the ID card, we might inadvertently, under the Freedom of Information laws, create a list that somebody could request, obtain, and then use to target a list of people who would be disproportionately undocumented. And while I tried to make sure we established that ID was not just for the undocumented, like I got one to make sure everybody saw my picture on there, we still had that problem. But we were able to partner with a local organization called La Casa de Amistad, which serves, started out with migrant farm workers and has increasingly served people in the city, so that they could handle part of the production of the ID cards while we, on the official side, established our recognition of them. So these kinds of partnerships can create ways of solving the problem, if we're willing to team up. Thanks.
So part of the bigger issue, like I'm a DACA recipient, and right now we're waiting for the Supreme Court to make a decision, right? Part of the bigger issue that is affecting our communities is really that fear in trusting someone again, right? The Latino community is very, very loyal, but we've been burned plenty of times. Under the Obama administration, I would say that we were tokenized in order for that election to be won. What exactly are your plans? You know, you talk about a pathway to citizenship for the undocumented immigrants and DACA recipients, but what does that timeline look like? The Obama administration wasn't able to accomplish it in the 8 years they were in office. Do you foresee yourself putting that as a priority within your first term?
Yeah, I think we need to get to work on it right away, because not only is it harming everyone who is in the shadows in this system, but it's also, in my view, become a national security vulnerability for the entire country. In other words, as long as it's easy to divide Americans over this issue, then we're a weaker nation as a whole. And so I think we need to deprive those who would like to use this as an excuse to divide us. By solving the underlying issue, we can eliminate that source of division. Think about it this way: if this White House really wanted to resolve immigration issues, they could do it. There's a bipartisan consensus, and then they could claim credit for the achievement. But they've made a decision not to, and I think that shows that the division is more useful to them than the achievement would be. For my White House, the reverse would be true. We are depending on a more unified American people. And that means addressing this issue that has over 11 million people now living in the shadows. And whether we're talking about DACA or the overall status of undocumented Americans, more and more mixed status families, right? Where we have one family member serving in the military or participating in the economy and carrying that burden of wondering if their family members are secure. The pressures that puts on people from the experience of middle school all the way into the working world, that's a drag on our community. And so I think this has to be a priority. But again, I also see an American majority willing to support this. And on issue after, this is also true on issues like, think about the federal minimum wage. You would think that this was unpopular if you just looked at coverage. Most Americans, including in conservative places, want to do this. So we have a strong American majority on immigration reform, on health care, on raising wages, on supporting workers, on gun safety. I mean, things where Democrats used to be on defense. There's an American majority, if we can keep it. And engaging that majority, I think, helps us then with the bigger project of uniting the American people.
So you are willing to commit to make this a priority on your first term?
Yes.
But the Obama administration made a promise that with the first 100 days and those passed and nothing happened, the first 2 years that passed, nothing happened, and now he's out of office and we're in this hot mess.
Right.
And the hateful rhetoric against our community continues to grow every single day, is heightened every single day, and now, our lives are in the hands of the Supreme Court, which in my opinion, that's not where this should have landed.
Yes.
To begin with, right?
And that's why this has to be codified in legislation, right? Because to be subject, of course, we're glad that DACA happened, but to have that vulnerable to the stroke of a pen and then being tested in the courts without having it coded in law. Now, that brings us to the other point, which is, of course, so much depends on the House and the Senate. And it's why, first of all, I believe that nominating someone from the middle of the country, from the kinds of communities that this president appealed to, will have a coattail effect that can help get a Senate majority. But also, even if we don't have a majority for my party in the Senate, I believe that the right kind of application of political pressure can engage an American willingness that wasn't there even 10 years ago to do this. Because we've seen, the Senate passed a bill and the House killed it, the House passed a bill and the Senate killed it. Now's the time to make sure that the legislative action happens, because executive orders are not secure. When your peace of mind depends on this, it's not enough to have something that every 4 years is at risk, depending on who's sitting in the chair.
How are you going to address racism? I mean, we were all surprised at the outcome of the last election. I thought it would never be possible to elect somebody who was so blatant on, his derogatory opinions of Latinos and in general women and other groups of people. And I felt like I thought I wouldn't see that on my lifetime. I thought it was, back on Hitler time, and it happened. And clearly all you have said is very sound to us, and we have all thought about this, and we say it's a really good idea and plan. How is this going to sound to that other half of the American population that think the way Trump thinks, or at least agree with him in some of his opinions?
Right. I would think about it on 2 levels. There's the policy level that we've been talking about, policy changes that need to happen. But there's a deeper level, a bigger one, of what the presidency is for. And I think part of the function of the presidency is to set a tone, a moral tone for the country. And honestly, a lot of it's in what you don't do, right? Just having, we have more than we realized, we've depended on a president to not act in certain harmful ways or racist ways. But it's also proactive. It's how do we have a president who establishes a tone of that sense of belonging that I'm talking about, who in symbolic as well as concrete ways sends out that message that racism is unacceptable in the United States. And I think part of the consequence of the election of Donald Trump is an awareness in the United States that these forces will not go away on their own. You cannot just set up a neutral policy where there used to be a racist policy and expect that eventually equality and tolerance will come. It's why I welcome the turn in our discussions nationally toward what it means to be anti-racist and being active in that way. And this has to be part of all of our decision-making, and even our language, the messages that we send, the way we teach in schools. Because this can start, nobody's born racist, but people can get there pretty quickly, depending on what messages people take in education. It's why teaching about the contributions of marginalized communities is so important from an early age. And it's why we have to build a sense of solidarity among different groups who've had different experiences of exclusion or harm, but knit them together in a coalition, because it turns out that's most Americans, if you add everybody up. Just everybody who's been insulted by this president constitutes a big majority, right, of the American people. There's not a lot of folks left who haven't been insulted in some way. but we shouldn't be naive about what we're up against. And I do believe also that while anyone who supported this president is at best looking the other way on racism, at best, there are a lot of people who his message might have found fertile ground with them, but a better message will lead them away. Not everybody, right? The day he resigned in disgrace, Richard Nixon had a quarter of the American people solidly with him. So there's some people who will never budge. But I also think that if we look at why some of these xenophobic and hateful messages find fertile ground, sometimes more in certain times than in other times, we can also find strategies to oppose it, a kind of anti-radicalization strategy that we need to pursue from the White House on down.
And any other, so all the time that we have for today?
Oh, geez, all right. It's just getting warmed up. Maybe a closing thought.
Just a quick question. So you're very aware of the situation for immigration and the need of an immigration reform. And you are saying now that executive orders are not a solution and probably going through the Congress would be. What would be your first step to solve this? Because everybody, like the DACA, TPS, asylum, all of them, they feel that their cases are their priority.
Yeah.
But what would be your first, and do you think that 4 years would be enough? What would be, this is priority
Yeah.
to solve immigration reform, which is huge.
Yeah, so let's break this very quickly into day one, medium term, and then long term.
Mhm.
So day one, first of all, a humane enforcement policy at the border, a permanent end to family separation, a way to reunite families that have been divided, an end to for-profit detention. So these kinds of things can be done at the stroke of a pen. And of course, I will act using executive power, just to be clear, to extend TPS, to restore DACA protections and so forth. But I don't want us to just lean on that and say, okay, job done, right? So day one, we intervene in all the ways that we can. Then there's the medium term, and medium term still means first term, just to be true, Fernando, to my promise to you. And that's where we have a big picture reform that is about the lawful system, the quotas, the country caps, as well as about the pathway to citizenship and the protections that need to be there. And anything else we need to take up as a country to make sure that we're not in the same situation 30 years from now. Then we talk about the big picture for the long term in terms of the hemisphere. And that is where we have to accept that the United States has a very strong stake in there being peace, prosperity, and democracy, not in the form of unwelcome intervention, but in the form of robust support, economically, socially, and politically, so that there's prosperity. So I always think of there was someone at one of the migration centers who said, no estoy buscando el sueño americano, estoy huyendo una pesadilla. And we've got to make sure we're speaking to that. We want to make sure that immigration is happening because people are pursuing a dream, not because people have no other choice. And that is a long-term moral challenge for the United States in our foreign policy, our foreign aid, and the way we interact with the rest of the world.
If my, okay, let it start.
Okay. Yes, sir. As I mentioned before, I'm a Marine Corps veteran, and I have a question related to Puerto Rico.
Yes.
Topic.
2 years ago, I was involved in here and helping and raise funds and supplies and everything for Hurricane Maria in Puerto Rico, and a lot of people here in this table in the community helped me with that goal. But then the talk was about Puerto Rico all the time, Hurricane Maria, how we're going to help them, who's not helping, what the president did or didn't do. Today, I don't see that many candidates talking about that in their campaign. And it hits me in my heart. I mean, I served in the military. I just went to Puerto Rico recently. I saw a lot of veterans and family members that they still got blue cards. And nothing has been mentioned in the campaign trail. So my question to you, sir, is what is your policy towards Puerto Rico? Is it still going to be the status quo that it is right now, where people could join the military, serve this country, and they still don't have vote and representation in Congress or in the Senate? And are they going to do anything about what's going on in Puerto Rico regarding funding? Because it's all about representation and then the funding.
That's
exactly right. Nobody's represented, nobody's going to do anything about it.
And in addition to that, we are from Puerto Rico.
Yes.
So, even for the same hometown.
So, yeah, this is so important. I know, just very quickly, First of all, we're talking about the United States. We're talking about United States citizens who have reason to feel like second-class citizens. And the delays in the response to Maria are shameful. And yes, we need to put dollars and resources behind that. In addition to making sure when we look at the Jones Act and the future of the way Puerto Rico is treated, that we are building up economic prosperity on the island. And I think you were right that all of these problems of empowerment get better when you have political representation. Now, I recognize that the decision about statehood needs to be made by the people of Puerto Rico, but I believe that if the decision is statehood, that needs to be welcomed. And I believe we shouldn't have to wait on that decision to at least have electoral votes for the people of Puerto Rico now. I understand that representation in Congress is something that's connected to paying federal income taxes and goes back to the statehood question. But I think that if there were electoral votes for Puerto Rico, maybe there wouldn't have been such a slow response on something like Maria. And that's a political reform. Just as in a different way, but it reminds me a little bit, the District of Columbia has U.S. citizens who lack political representation, and it shows. There it's the reverse. They have the electoral votes, but not the congressional representation. But I believe we can make that reform sooner rather than later and open the path toward greater representation and do right by people who are, again, fellow United States citizens who deserve to be treated just the same as others. Thank you so much for the opportunity to be here. I know it's the beginning of a conversation, and you'll be seeing us again, but I'm so thankful for what's happening. And also for the work that you're doing to make sure that the Latino community is aware of its power and voice in this election, because I think this really is, we're living through the season where that voice will really be a transformative force in U.S. politics, and a positive one. So,
No,
if you want to close us
and
out.
thank you for being here and give us the opportunity to talk and more important that you listen. Sometimes political people love to talk and sometimes they never listen, and as I said, we have a great representation here, and we are all together more than achieving the American dream, to help others to achieve the American dream.
Very good.
And for us, that most of us are transplant here, and we love coming here. We love living here in Beaufort, and we have a great opportunity to help others. And starting for all the undocumented people that we have in here, that they work hard every day. They try to achieve that American dream. I think they deserve some respect and some opportunity to also achieve as any other American, like us, that we are from Puerto Rico, that we are even U.S. citizens, but still struggling here to achieve our dream. And we are U.S. citizens.
Right.
So, and thank you all you guys for being here today. I think that's going to be the first for other conversation, and as I said to your team, it's the first time that we have a presidential candidate sitting here and asking for a roundtable to talking about the Latino agenda, and that's a big step. We are honored to be part of this process, and I hope that any other events that you want to do with all these extraordinary people here, they know, and I know they're gonna help you guys.
Fantastic. Thank you very much. We look forward to remaining in touch. Please get to know our organizing team too, because I know they'll be eager to stay connected. So thanks so much for the opportunity.